This is the artificial intelligence voice of Konstantin Kisin narrating this Podslice summary of the Triggernometry podcast. The discussion between host Konstantin Kisin and guest Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia, revolved around the challenges faced by Western countries. They discussed the serious nature of current events, including China's peacetime rearmament, the ongoing war in Ukraine, and the recent attacks inflicted by Hamas on Israel. Abbott highlights the struggling response of Western countries, for instance, to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as indicative of difficult times, leaving the Ukrainian state balanced between enduring Russian occupation or escalating to open, full-scale conflict. A significant part of their conversation revolved around the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Abbott believed the policy to deal with the disease caused more damage than the virus itself, saddling nations with dire financial debt, damaging work ethics, and overall impacting global morale. Particularly, he criticized governments that have been, in his view, acting against the fundamentals of free, smaller government, leading to overly restrictive measures against the freedom of their citizens and massive surveillance systems. They also addressed the current approach to climate change. Abbott expressed skepticism about the human influence on climate change and noted the irrationality in spending billions on converting traditional power systems based on coal, oil, and gas to renewables, particularly amidst the posed strategic challenges by nations like China. He suggested that the emissions obsession is problematic and could further hamper the prosperity of Western countries. Abbott further pointed out a contrast in Western and non-Western nations. While countries like China are investing heavily in armaments, Western countries are diverting enormous resources to control emissions and transforming their power systems. An initiative which he suggested is significantly impacting their economies. Abbott warned against making major economic sacrifices to achieve net zero in the next few decades. Abbott's views sparked discussion with Kisin about the role of leadership in navigating these challenges and the perceived leftward shift in the political spectrum. It touched on major topics like climate change denial and the socio-political consequences of government decisions. However, they did not completely agree on all of them. The shared sentiment was that the West has been faced with substantial challenges, both within their own societies and from foreign powers. Continuing the discussion, Tony Abbott delves deeper into climate change skepticism. He acknowledges the fundamental science that an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide should theoretically warm the planet. However, he notes that many other factors affect climate change, such as sunspot activity and alterations in Earth's orbit. Throughout history, the planet has experienced significant climate shifts unrelated to human carbon dioxide emissions, such as the Roman and medieval warm periods or the mini ice age in the 1600s. While recognizing that increased carbon dioxide could result in warmer climate and rising sea levels, Abbott argues that these are adaptable changes. He questions the alarmist rhetoric around climate change, suggesting that it's encouraging harmful policies that may weaken economies and societies unnecessarily. Addressing the precautionary principle, he makes the point that precautions shouldn't lead to impoverishment or damaging ordinary people's cost of living. Discussing political strategies, he argues against creating new political parties, endorsing instead the idea of reforming existing ones. Parties like the Conservative Party of the UK, he argues, are still open to the influence of their members and they can be shaped from within. However, he does acknowledge the significant impact of figures like Nigel Farage, who managed to change the political landscape from the outside and force the Brexit issue to the forefront. Abbott points out the risk of ordinary people losing faith in democracy if they perceive their elected politicians pursuing policies contrary to common sense. He warns against the rise of fringe parties and individuals opting out of the system due to disillusionment. Instead, he champions activism within existing democratic structures, citing the importance of tradition, cautious change, and patriotism at the heart of conservative instinct. Abbott emphasizes that the main focus of political parties should be on the betterment of public welfare and not just adjusting to the current political wave. He suggests that some politicians might be focusing more on looking good than doing good and warns against policies that could jeopardize the fundamentals of free markets, liberty, and democracy. He stresses upon the need for a resilient coping strategy to deal with societal changes without destroying the existing civilization. Reflecting on technological advancement and digital surveillance, the conversation touches on Abbott's belief that while technology can be incredibly empowering, it has also been a fabulous tool of state control. Nessie's views open a discussion of the potential implication of technology on privacy rights and the concept of a massive surveillance state monitoring citizens. Abbott concludes by underscoring the importance of personal freedom and the need for restraint in the use of invasive technology by governments. In this part of the podcast, guest Tony Abbott articulates his perception of how financial responsibility and prudence have seemingly evaporated, especially within countries like the UK and USA. He highlights the constant money printing and the hiking public spending that invariably creates extensive debts and consequently burdens the ordinary citizen. Recalling the success of John Howard's government in Australia, Abbott emphasizes the importance of a first principles review of policy, reconsideration of what the government should and should not do, as well as developing a fresh blueprint to guide future forward-thinking strategies. He pivots the conversation further into the fabric of society, urging for a renewed focus on making economies more dynamic and advanced. The challenge, Abbott argues, is to outpace strategic competitors like Russia and China in the technology race while preserving social norms and dignities. It opines on the current trend of spending on commercializing social care, including aged care, disability care, and childcare. Abbott proposes a more frugal approach, suggesting these aspects ought to be handled by the family unit, hence promoting social connectivity and reducing expenditure. Next, Abbott brings attention to the housing crisis, identifying it as a complex problem with multiple causes. He cites the cost of construction, often jacked up by environmental and planning rules, alongside quantitative easing inflating asset prices and immigration. And he presents the growing sentiment that immigration is both an economic necessity and a moral obligation, as troubling and calls attention to the need for policy overhaul. As the discussion turns towards defense spending, Abbott speaks on how, while Western military forces have been reduced, strategic competitors have ramped up their defenses. He particularly points out China's recent substantial rearmament, indicating the potential for conflicts in East Asia. Finally, Abbott makes the case for traditional political movements, arguing that his dismissal as prime minister was, in part, due to his hard line on certain issues. However, he also recognizes that every citizen has a role to play in the quality of democracy and encourages more and more people to get involved and make a difference. The podcast iteration presents Tony Abbott discussing various geopolitical situations, including the delicate issues surrounding Taiwan. Abbott recognizes that the political heads within Beijing are closely following global events, gauging the potential for a successful attack on Taiwan. Putin's mission to recreate a greater Russia. The Chinese leadership views it vital to end their perceived century of humiliation and re-establish China as the world's middle kingdom. He emphasizes that China's measures have shifted from economic modernization to the strategic rollout of a global dominance plan, which includes overtaking Taiwan, an independent liberal democracy. Now, that underlines the intricacy of the Taiwan issue, linking it to the wider geopolitical dynamics. He points out the necessity for allied democracies to signal their willingness to defend Taiwan while also keeping open lines for peaceful resolution. Hassisgay underscores the importance of maintaining global stability, given the potential ripple effects of a conflict involving China and Taiwan. On the question of handling the situation, should he be in power? Abbott makes clear his approach, strengthening the economy, rejecting divisive ideologies, fortifying defenses, and fostering national unity. He stresses that choices influence the national strength and capability, such as the ability to manufacture munitions and vital tech like microchips. Abbott adds that countries, including America and Britain, shouldn't weaken themselves by imposing unnecessary burdens, be it green regulations or concessions to woke education and gender ideology. Abbott clearly articulates the balancing act that nations need to perform, juggling charity, justice, and the necessity of self-defense. He logically argues that weak nations attract conflicts, hence the vital need to display strength and unity. The conversation steers towards possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Abbott offers reassurance, dismissing this as inevitable, labeling China's rulers as cruel and focused but not crazy. They will execute an action only if they assess a high potential for success and low risk to their long-term objectives. He signs off echoes of encouragement, urging British listeners to retain belief in themselves and their nation. The podcast moves to discuss the thorny issue of illegal immigration. Abbott pinpoints Australia as an exceptional case that has effectively halted a large wave of illegal immigration by small boats. He attributes this triumph to the establishment of a unified command structure, essentially the operational sovereignty over their borders. This conversation opens the door for an examination of how developed countries handle immigration issues. As the dialogue delves deeper into Australia's strategy on immigration, Abbott elucidates on the intricacies of its approach, stating that the universal command structure is integral to its success. This structure centralized immigration decisions, providing the government with the necessary control and ability to execute its border policies effectively. On the topic of immigration enforcement, Abbott offers insightful comparisons between Australia and other countries. His arguments suggest that a nation's capacity to enforce strict immigration policies correlates with its overall strength and unity. He reiterates that potential immigrants are less likely to target stronger nations, further emphasizing the point he made earlier about the attraction of weak countries to conflicts. Moving on, Abbott dives into the controversial subject of illegal immigration. He presents it as a multifaceted issue involving humanitarian concerns, national security, and political implications. Abbott places emphasis on the need for a firm but fair approach, reinforcing the idea of the balancing act between charity and justice he previously mentioned. Turning towards his experience as Prime Minister of Australia, Abbott shares how his administration managed to reduce illegal immigration. He discusses the controversial measure they took, turning back boats laden with illegal immigrants. Yet, according to Abbott, this policy was a tough but necessary decision that successfully deterred illegal crossing, positioning the discussion from national to global concerns. Abbott brings up the challenges faced by other countries, specifically the United States and Britain. Policy cautions these countries about the risks of weakening themselves through unnecessary burdens, including burdens relating to immigration policies. For him, it's not just about controlling borders, but maintaining ideological health that's free from polarizing and counterproductive elements.